The Capitalist Code is a real look at investing for all ages. I would like to welcome President Society member, campaign contributor, and docent Dale Goldfarb to the stage to introduce our speaker. Dale and his wife Jan are local Yorba Linda residents who are dedicated supporters of the foundation. Dale was a dedicated docent, while Jan serves as a member of the President's Leadership Council and is an advisory group who strategically advises and supports events like this. Dale, thank you.
Thank you, Bill. A little overeager there, right? So excited. Ben has been a great supporter of the foundation for years, and we're really pleased to have him here again. As you know, after he worked at the White House, he left and he was a commentator on Fox News and CNN. He also wrote articles for the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Fortune magazine. He's remembered for his great role as the economics professor in Ferris Bueller's Day Off, and his book today is, of course, about economics. So I guess he was a professor at one point in time. His friend Warren Buffett just recently made the following statement about this book, and I'm going to have to read it because it's a really new quote. And Warren Buffett said, "Ben Stein has written a short book that tells you everything you need to know about investing, and in words you can understand. Follow Ben's advice and you'll do far better than almost all investors, and I include pension funds, universities, and the super rich, like myself, who pay high fees to advisors." And that's Warren Buffett's advice, to take Ben Stein's advice. Fairly high praise indeed. The book is for everyone, the rich, the not so rich, the old, the young. It's written to be read and understood and used. We're pleased to have him here. I present to you Ben Stein.
Thank you, Counselor. It's always a great pleasure to be at the Nixon Library. I always get very emotional when I'm here. I have worked for Mr. Nixon. I've been a great fan of Mr. Nixon since I was in elementary school. And every time I see that movie about Mr. Nixon, I get very worked up. And so if I'm a little discombobulated, I apologize. But as I say, I get very worked up when I'm in the presence of anything having to do with Nixon. First of all, thank you for so many of you being here at this on this beautiful day when you could be outside enjoying yourselves. I'm going to start off with the obvious. Money is a huge factor in life. Worry, exaltation, fear, terror about it are commonplace. Lack of money is a devastating, devastating blow, especially in your older years. It can literally wreck your life. There's a Asian saying, "No money, no life," and that is exactly true. Fear about money can just tear you into little pieces. And so how do you get to a position where you have some security about money? Well, ask Mr. Goldfarb. No, I first got a clue about this. Well, my parents were not poor people, but they did it mostly because they were very frugal and worked very hard. They were children of the Depression and learned how to be frugal and careful about money. But I've never had that gift. I've always been extremely reckless about money. So the question is, how do you make money even when you're asleep? That's the basic question of life. And how do you have your money working for you? And here we go back to a story that involves my sister. I'm sure many of us in this room have siblings, and I have a very, very smart sibling who, to give you an example of how smart she is, when a few years ago I said to her, did you ever think when I was a little tyke, 3 years younger than you, that I would become so famous? And she said, well, I didn't think about you at all. And I don't think she was lying. Anyway, several years before that, my sister came back from a fundraiser. She's a big fundraiser for various causes, mostly involving Israel, but not always. Nowadays it's about education for African American students. And she came back from that, and I said, who was the group you were with? And she said, well, they were a group of wealthy women in New Jersey. And I said, were they husbands or wives of doctors, lawyers, dentists, orthodontists? What were they? She said, oh, no. Those people have a little bit of money. These people were pre-dad. That is, they had inherited big businesses, factories, shopping centers, apartment buildings. They were pre-dad, the best kind of business to be in, either pre-dad or pre-granddad. And which reminds me of a story that I have to tell you now at this point. There are these three old men sitting on a park bench in Miami, and one says, they're all from Brooklyn. One says to the other, Bernie, I haven't seen you since we were kids at Erasmus Hall High School in Brooklyn. What happened to you? How do you find yourself down here in Miami Beach? And the other one says, well, I inherited a toy factory from my grandfather, and it was in Passaic, New Jersey, and it was doing really, really well. And then we had Far Eastern competition come in, and it was just killing us. And we thought we were going to have to go bankrupt, but then one of the cleaning crew threw a lit cigarette into a pile of greasy rags and started a fire, and it burned down the whole building. And we collected the insurance, and we came down here. And she said, how did you get here, Sid? And the other one says, well, I had a children's pajama factory in the Bronx, and we were doing really, really well. And then we got hit by Far Eastern competition. We were really, really in terrible trouble. We thought we were going to have to go into bankruptcy. Excuse me. And so then one day, one of the workmen left on the fire suppression system by mistake and flooded the factory and destroyed all the equipment. And we got our insurance and moved down here. They said to the third one, Barney, how did you get down here? And he said, well, sort of a similar story. I had a young Mrs. ready-to-wear dress business in Paramus, New Jersey, and we were doing fairly well. I had inherited it from my grandfather. And then Far Eastern competition came in. It was just killing us, and we thought we were going to have to go bankrupt. But we moved instead to Puerto Rico, where they have a very good tax climate, very hardworking labor force, good, very, very, very good policies in terms of labor. And we were doing great. And then a gigantic hurricane came along one day and just knocked the whole factory off its foundations and destroyed everything. And so we took the insurance, we came over here, and the first two look at each other, and they look at him, and they say, how do you make a hurricane? Anyway, it's great to own a business. I mean, let's cut to the chase. It's great to own a business. It's wonderful now, Dale and I are lawyers. I'm a lawyer by training. He's a lawyer by lifetime work, and obviously he's done spectacularly well at it. But it's great to own a business. It's much greater, I think, she may disagree with me, it's much greater to own a business than to be selling your labor. It's fine to sell your labor, especially if you can sell it for $1,200 an hour, but it's really, really great to own a business that is working and making money for you even while you're sleeping. And that's called being pre-dad, because we can't all be businessmen and start our own businesses. It takes a certain amount of ingenuity, a certain amount of initiative, a certain amount of enterprise, a certain amount of discipline, self-sacrifice to start a business. And it also takes luck. You cannot be sure that you'll be able to start the business. So but if you can have a business, it's really, really great to have a business. And that's a wonderful thing to have. But as I say, for most people in the world, they're just not cut out to be businessmen. Most of the people in this country, even this very entrepreneurial, initiative-centered country, it's not everyone is cut out to be a businessman or a businesswoman. So how do you get to be a businessman or businesswoman and have money working for you and making money for you even while you're sleeping? Well, it turns out that there's where the great miracle of American capitalism comes in, the public corporation. Now, I must say, I had always been told that this was a great thing because my father was a free market economist and a stock market investor, although not a particularly good one. But he was a great guy, but not a particularly great investor. And I I always learned that corporations were great things, and they allowed people to aggregate money and to put money together and start businesses and produce goods and services. But then something occurred to me when I was watching a speech in 2012 by our good friend Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts. And she was giving a speech at the Democrat convention, and she said, corporations are the enemy. Corporations are not human. They don't breathe. They don't cry. They don't have joy. They don't have pity. They don't have sorrow. They don't have empathy. Corporations are not human. And I thought, well, you just couldn't be more wrong, because corporations are aggregations of human beings who are working. Corporations are aggregations of human beings who are having great ideas, doing research, making new things, making new services, making new products, making new ways to live life in a better way. And at the same point, paying the people who work there a salary so they can educate their children and feed their families and put bread on the table and put a roof over their head. And also, they are making money that goes into people's stocks in their form of dividends and capital gains that allows people to save for retirement, allows people to pay for their children's college education, and in some cases grandchildren's college education, allows for people to provide for old age, which is it's really amazing how fast old age comes upon you. It's not. I used to think it was slow, but I just woke up one morning just a few months ago, and I was old. Anyway, and so the stock corporation is an incredibly great thing because it allows the ordinary citizen to buy stock in corporations and thereby become a businessman or a businesswoman without having to worry about waking up in the middle of the night, having to work on a trucker strike or having to work on a burned out factory ball bearing or something like that. It's a wonderful way for the ordinary citizen to get to be a businessman. And if you start doing it at a young enough age and aggregate enough capital, you are in essence an owner of a business. Only the business is, if you do it sensibly, not just one business, like say the trucking business or the laundromat business. The business is instead all of the businesses. And thereby, from that, I reached back into my memory for a book about stock market investing. There's many great books on this subject, but the one that says that the way to beat the market is to buy the market. That you cannot pick stocks and beat the market. And you cannot hire advisors to pick stocks and beat the market. You just have to buy the whole market itself. And if you buy enough of the whole market itself, you are in essence becoming a businessman or a businesswoman and owning a big chunk of American business and owning not a big chunk compared to the total aggregate of it, but compared to what you need to live your life. And you will get those businesses working day and night, 24-hour shifts, producing income for you, even when you're old, even when you're sick, even when you're infirm. They're producing income for you to keep your life going along at a happy, cheerful pace. And so Senator Warren got this all totally wrong, but she did help explain to me what was going on. Corporations are a huge gift to the American worker. Corporations allow the worker to be like the serf was in olden days, except that the serf at the end of his life owned nothing. But if you're a serf in American business now, and you're a worker, and if you buy stock on a continuing basis, you get to own the castle and own the manor house and own a big part of the estate. And that's an amazing gift. And they make it possible to do that without having to do this horrible thing of being responsible for the debts of the corporation. In Britain and in Canada and in other countries that used to be part of the British Commonwealth, and I guess are still part of the British Commonwealth, they're referred to as LLCs, limited liability corporations. And this is the great gift of owning stock. If I buy stock in the XYZ Corporation and it has a great year, I make money. And if the market's going up, I make money. And if I buy stock in the XYZ Corporation and it goes bankrupt, I don't owe any more money. My exposure is limited to the amount of money I put into the stock in the first place. I don't owe any additional money. If I buy an apartment building, it's a totally different story. If I buy an apartment building, yes, it's great. I get to collect the rents. I get to wake up in the middle of the night because somebody has a clogged toilet. I get to wake up in the middle of the night because the guy above him was filling a waterbed and forgot to turn it off and his apartment got flooded. I get to wake up in the middle of the night because the sheriffs want to serve a warrant on somebody. You get all kinds of great things from being in real estate. But when you're in business by owning stock, you don't have to have any kind of worries about any debts exceeding the amount of money you put into the corporation in the first place. And as I say, this essentially makes you an owner of a business, and an owner of a business without much of a downside, except if there's a big market downturn. And there have been many big market downturns, but they have never lasted forever. And even in the Great Depression, it's a myth that things never recovered in the Great Depression. Dividends were very, very high during the Great Depression. So if you counted dividends, people had recovered basically all of the losses in 1929 by 1937. So how do you become a successful businessman pre-dad and become your owner of your own business? You just buy stock. Don't listen to people who say, I can pick it for you. People, unless we have any people in the audience whose business is to do that, then you can listen to them, and I'm sure they're telling you the right thing. But just by buying the index, you can buy the S&P 500 index, you can buy the Vanguard Total Market Index, the Fidelity Total Market Index. All the giant indexes will give you a fabulous return over long periods of time, and a return that's almost unbelievable, both in terms of dividend and another enormous tax benefit. The equity that builds up within the corporation is tax-free. That is, if I own, for example, Berkshire Hathaway, I own a small amount of Berkshire Hathaway, that never pays a dividend. The money that they make is used to reinvest and buy new things and upgrade the corporations they already own, including some very large ones like Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railroad. And that is untaxed. There's no tax on it at all until you pass it on to your heirs, and then the way things are going, it doesn't look like there's going to be much estate tax at this point unless you've got a very large estate. So you get to be a businessman in an effortless, almost while you sleep way. And it involves another astonishing gift, which is liquidity. This is something so wonderful. At one point in my life, I determined I was going to become a real estate mogul, and I started buying real estate. And one of the things you learn when you buy real estate is it's very easy to buy and not always that easy to sell. Now, right now, here in glorious Southern California, we're undergoing a huge real estate boom, and things sell within a couple of hours after being put on the market. But now, everyone in this room, I'm sure, remembers times when it took months and years to sell real estate. That doesn't happen with stock. With stock, you can sell it in 30 seconds. That's a wonderful, wonderful thing. The tax advantage with that in stocks is a wonderful, wonderful thing. You can let it all work for you. There's no reason that any sensible person cannot put aside at least some of his money that he or she is earning when they're young, and put it into saving stock. And I'd like to put it to you in this interesting way. I'm 73 years old, and I feel every day of it, and I think to myself, who's going to take care of me when I'm old? Well, I was left some money by my parents, not a huge amount, but a little bit, and so was my sister, the one who didn't think of me when I was a child, and she was a child too, and now I call her up and remind her I'm alive, and but who takes care of us? The younger us. It is the young us who takes care of the older us. It is the young us who, when we were young and energetic and full of ideas and full of discipline, could put aside money and put it in the stock market in a broadly diversified way. Be patient about it. Be very, very patient about it. Let it grow. Let it gradually accumulate, preferably tax-free within the system, and then leave it to your grandchildren, or your children. You certainly don't want to enjoy it yourself. So the last thing you want to do is enjoy life yourself. So that's it. That's my incredibly simple advice for you. Is that the market and the stocks themselves allow you to become pre-dad without having a dad who's successful at it. And I'm going to read you a summary of the key lessons here that I've just told you, because I once had an editor. Some of you how many of you remember the Los Angeles Herald Examiner? Yay, we all remember the Herald Examiner. My editor there used to say to me that the secret of writing a decent column was to tell him what you're going to tell him, and then tell him what you told him. So I'm going to tell you this. Oh, well, I'm going to tell you something else. I'm going to tell you a couple of other things. Speak of Mrs. Warren. Corporations, speaking of corporations don't arrest people and send them off to the gulag. My neighbor here, Mr. Goldfarb, told me he had just come back from a trip to Cambodia where the government, in the name of equality, killed 1/3 of the people in the country. The Nazis, in the name of racial purity, killed 6 million Jews and about 30 million other people. The communists in Russia killed about 50 million people in the name of equality. The communists in China killed about 100 million people in the name of equality. Corporations don't do that. Corporations work tirelessly to make money for the people who've invested in them. Corporations are not the enemy. I keep wanting to say to Mrs. Warren, gosh, you really think corporations are the enemy? How stupid can you get? But I'll probably never get the chance to tell her. Anyway, okay. So here are the key lessons I've been trying to tell you. Free market democratic stock market capitalism is a phenomenal system for creating freedom and wealth for societies and nations. Free market democratic stock market capitalism is a fabulously effective way for individuals to become well-to-do and even rich. The people who tell you that capitalism is an evil, exploitative system for draining the blood of the workers and the non-whites are lying. There is no freer, more diverse, more equal opportunity employer than capitalism. Capitalists have no interest in your race, skin color, or sex. They only want to see what you can produce. If you can produce more than you cost, you get and keep a job. If you can produce a large amount of excess over your cost, you get well paid. And if you produce very much more than you cost, you get rich. Skin color and ancestry have nothing to do with it. Capitalism is and must be an equal opportunity employer. The people who tell you different are deeply incorrect as a matter of theory and fact. Next, in this life, the acquisition of money is of paramount importance. The acquisition of assets that produce income is life or death. The absolutely surest, simplest, easiest way to do that is by owning a diversified index of stocks. And this is from Buffett. This next one is a direct quote that Buffett says almost every year. The preferred holding period for your investments is forever. You shouldn't be looking to make money on stock price movement. You should be looking to make money as the corporation grows and becomes more profitable. There's an immense tax subsidy built into owning stock through the non-taxation of run-ups in book value until the stock is sold, and also in terms of the vastly lower taxes on income from capital gains and from labor. Take advantage of those subsidies. The goal is not to play the market. That way lies insanity. The goal is to let your children become pre-dad and end up owning your own business made up of many infinitesimal shares of all the biggest businesses on Wall Street. I look around at the people I know in my life. I have a lot of friends. I've been really blessed in life. I have a lot of friends. And I look at the ones who are in trouble, and I look at the ones who are not in trouble. And the ones who are in trouble are basically people who have not bothered to use any discipline in their lives about money and are totally broke and dependent on people and worried and terrified about money. People who are having a good time in life, especially as they get towards my antique age, are people who have acquired capital. It is an incredibly important thing to acquire capital. It's an incredibly important thing to have capital to help take care of you when you're old and frail and weak. The stock market is the way to do it. Ladies and gentlemen, that's all I have to say to you, and if you want to ask questions, feel free. Thank you very much.
We have time.
I told you it would be very short.
It's great. Thank you.
That's one of the things Mr. Nixon once said to me, is that when you start to give a speech, the main interest of the people you're speaking to is for it to be over.
Right. Our first question is from Steve Alexson. I saw Steve's hand up.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Stein. It's
You're
really,
welcome.
really wonderful to see you again. And
Well, it's my
your
great
insight
pleasure.
is incredible. Thank
My
you
great
so
pleasure,
much.
sir. Thank you.
You know, just wanted to make one comment. The political climate is a little tense right now, but when you look at the markets, the stock markets, I'm a stock market guy, so I appreciate everything you say. It's one of the only areas where Republicans and Democrats can actually do business together.
Oh, they have to do business
They have to
together.
do business
They have to
together.
do business together.
So
You know,
maybe you can,
you've made a very good point. Not only does capitalism not care about your race or religion or sex, it doesn't care about your politics. If you can produce more than you cost, you get a job and you get well paid. And if you can pick stocks in my suggested way, pick the whole index, you'd get paid no matter what your politics are. Yeah, the stock market is absolutely non-discriminatory about politics. There's a man down there with his hand up. We need ever more free market and ever more free trade, I might add.
Well, good afternoon. My name is Judge Joseph DiLoretto, and I have a very important question for you. Whatever happened to winning Ben Stein's money?
Win Ben Stein's money made about 950 episodes, and I won about 80% of them, and so that was great. But then a huge part of the show was Jimmy Kimmel, who was my co-host, and he left, and they selected a woman co-host who was not at all funny. She was kind of grim and scary. And then they selected Jimmy Kimmel's cousin, Sal, who appears on the show with him every night on his late show. And he was great, but by then it was too late, and they decided they wanted to aim for a really young audience. So we're just gone with the wind. We're just a little wisp writing history on tissue paper.
Next question.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize you had your hand up.
Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you.
They say the millennials don't save anymore. Do you believe that's fake news? Or do you think that it's going to have a problem in the future with them not saving?
Well, they have to save. I mean, they have no alternative but to save. I've recently seen some data saying that millennials are saving more than was expected that they would, and that they're really not in as bad shape as we think. But there's some terrifying data about the savings habits of Americans. 50% of Americans could not come up with $500 for an emergency within 2 weeks. 50%. The average savings, this is the average savings of people who are in middle age for retirement, is in the neighborhood of $80,000, and that average is drawn way up by people like Warren Buffett. If you take the median, it's only something like $40,000. Bob, you looked it up the other day. What do you remember what it was? 5,000. Okay, thank you, Bob. Bob is my very important corrector of facts. The average savings, or the median savings, is just pathetically small, and people are going to really suffer because they haven't saved. It's so important to save. I don't understand how people don't know that. It's like there was a story in the Wall Street Journal, or maybe it was in the New York Times, I think the Wall Street Journal, a few days ago, saying, here's a suggested path to having a decent life. Don't have children before you're married. Finish your education, get married, then have children, and then work and save. And this seems so obvious. Now, as I've said now about 1,000 times, I'm 73, and this was basic knowledge when I was a child. Somehow it stopped being basic knowledge, and it became perfectly acceptable for people to have children before they were married, and to have children without having any kind of education or way to make a living, and instead become dependent upon the state. This is not a way for societies to thrive, and it's certainly not a way for individuals to thrive. Once you are a young woman, and an unmarried young woman without a career or without capital or without savings or well-to-do parents, and have children, you're behind the 8 ball for the rest of your life.
We have a question back here from Mark Adams.
Hi, Mr. Stein. I guess I'm one of those young people that you so fervently want to address. So I see in your book that one of your central tenets of your argument is that you should not trust anybody when it comes to the economy. But
No, that's not trust anyone. No, absolutely not. I think we can trust all the people running the economy by and large. I think what I'm saying is I would not trust people except people in this room who tell you they can pick stocks and outperform the market.
Okay, so you do argue that no one can predict the economy. That was my mistake. But at the same time, you argue that that nearly anybody, regardless of their sex, gender orientation, can get rich. And I view
I wouldn't say rich, but well-to-do.
Well-to-do. Well, I view that as a bit of a contradiction because, in my opinion, the upward mobility of people is severely limited in this country, and I don't believe it's because people are lazy, as you as you say.
Well,
it's
the data,
because-
I'm sorry, young fellow, but the data contradicts you that there's tremendous amounts of upward mobility for people who are from poor backgrounds or backgrounds where their parents did not attend college or even graduate from high school. If they attend college, their upward mobility is virtually unlimited. So, I mean, the data is that if you start out poor, if you do nothing whatsoever to improve your situation, if you don't finish high school, if you don't learn a trade, if you have children before you are married, you are screwed, royally screwed. If you do any steps necessary to basically necessary to improve your life, you do great. I mean, it's the upward mobility for people who have education, discipline, and organized family lives is fantastic. It's as good as it's ever been.
We have time for a few more questions.
Sir, thank you for coming. I appreciate your talk. I have a question with regards to automation and AI. As the workforce over time gradually is replaced with automation, I think we can all agree that down the road, we're still going to have to provide for some essential government services, military, et cetera. As our workforce decline, how does that tax structure look like when we now have a large majority of people who no longer need to work?
We're going to have to tax robots. They won't know. What the heck? Put a special program in them so that they don't care how much they get taxed. No, I don't know the answer to that question. I do know that ever more to follow up on that young man's question, ever more education is going to be required. I mean, the educational requirements of the future generations, it seems to me, are going to be greater and greater and greater, and yet young people today know less and less and less. So it's a real serious problem. I have taught, I've been a teacher myself, and it's terrifying how little young people know, but somehow that's got to change. We cannot be a first-class power and a first-class nation with second, third, fourth-class citizens. Yes, sir.
Before we get to the last question, we are going to be able to get our book signed by Mr. Stein right off to my right. And what we'll do is, after he answers this last question, we'll release you all table by table to keep it kind of orderly. He'll sign your book. You guys can relax, have some coffee instead of just standing in line. But for the last question, I want to tie it to President Nixon. We are in the house of Nixon. Can you tell us something that we all don't know, a story about President and Mrs. Nixon to wrap up this speech?
He had a great sense of humor. Mrs. Nixon had a great sense of humor. Since I'm sitting next to my friends from the Hanukkah celebration, I will say he was the best friend that the Jews of the world have ever had in the whole history of the world. And the idea that he was a racist or an anti-Semite was absolute nonsense. That no person ever in history, the Jewish religion is something like 5,800 years old, and is that roughly 5,800 years old? And no one ever has gone to the trouble and stood up for the Jews the way Nixon did during the Yom Kippur War, despite the fact that Jews were among the most vicious people attacking him during Watergate. So, I had my next door neighbor when I was growing up was a person who became quite a famous reporter named Carl Bernstein. And Carl came over to our house actually on Easter because we belonged to a club down in Rancho Mirage that has a very wonderful Easter brunch, and he was staying at a hotel near there, and he had nowhere to go, so we invited him for our brunch. And I have to say that the glorious thing about America is that even though I would just as soon have shot him for what he said about Nixon, we just all cheerfully sat and ate our lunch and went on with our day. But and I think Nixon would probably have done the same thing. Nixon was a gracious man, and people say to me, well, how do you think Nixon should be ranked as president? I can't think of any other better president than Nixon. I mean, Nixon kept us out of a larger war, made the world a safer place. We still live in the house that Nixon built in terms of building a lasting structure of peace. When I was a speechwriter for Mr. Nixon, we were told to use that phrase, a lasting structure of peace, whenever we could in speeches. And we all of us assumed it was just a catchphrase that meant nothing. But it didn't mean nothing. He was a peacemaker. Blessed are the peacemakers. they shall be called the children of God, and that's Nixon. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.